Allen Lund Company, 47 years young and a proud sponsor, wishes OOIDA all the best as you celebrate 50 years.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
Some truck drivers in a small town in Texas are getting hefty fines while they're parked. Landline Now's Ashley Blackford speaks with OOIDA's Advocacy Council about how law enforcement could be using this as a way to bring in revenue for that small town. The battle to choose a new Speaker of the U.S. House continues to plow forward. Meanwhile, a task force looking at lease-purchase agreements is a step closer to completing its assigned task. I'll discuss those and more with OOIDA Director of Federal Affairs, Jay Grimes. And finally, the Transportation Security Administration has issued a proposed rule for mobile driver's licenses, and one group is not happy about it. I'll find out what's going on from Landline Magazine staff writer Tyson Fisher. But first, the news with Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Mark. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg was at the Port of Miami this week to detail projects that funding was announced for earlier this year. $21 million has been awarded to the port through 2 Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity grants since last August.
We're going to work together to expand the speed and the capacity of cargo moving through this port, helping to add 2 new tracks to the on-port rail yard, which will translate to 87,000 containers of additional rail capacity per year. We'll fix a major truck bottleneck, helping to modernize the cargo gate system. The point is not just to get America's supply chains to what they looked like before the pandemic, which was fine on a good day, but too often not able to handle a disruption. Our goal is to strengthen these supply chains and bring more of them home to America so that they are not just fair weather supply chains, but ones that can withstand all of the threats they face.
Buttigieg says in addition to increasing Miami's cargo capacity, efforts are underway to make the port more resilient to rising sea levels from climate change with a stormwater management system.
And not only are our supply chains impacted by climate change, we have to be part of the solution to climate change. Reducing the amount of carbon pollution created at this port with things like electric gantry trains and reduced truck congestion means less greenhouse gas emissions, and it means cleaner air for everybody who lives right around this port. And this isn't just about all the things that could go wrong if we allow these problems to accelerate. It's about the opportunity we're unleashing. It is time right here, right now in the transportation sector to break the old false choice between resilience, climate work, and jobs, and recognize the opportunity to support and create more good-paying jobs through this action on resilience and climate. Whether it's construction workers doing the modernization of the infrastructure, workers manufacturing the materials and the low-carbon equipment being used in these projects, like the electric cranes that will soon be operating in more and more ports in this country, or the ways that we can protect good jobs in America.
$16 million for the port's net zero cargo mobility optimization and resiliency project was announced back in August of last year. In July of this year, $5 million was announced to assist in funding Port Miami's planning and design studies for carbon neutralization of on-port operations and the development of an inland cargo center, among other projects. A recent article from Axios reveals a growing concern among emergency officials when it comes to driverless cars and the safety of pedestrians and emergency vehicles. The article states that since July, the Austin, Texas Transportation Public Works Department has received 40 complaints from residents and first responders about near collisions with autonomous vehicles. One of the examples in the article tells of an Austin police official who was escorting a fundraising walk and reported an autonomous vehicle attempted to turn onto the street at a red light where the walkers were. If the officer had not jumped in front and physically made contact with the vehicle, it might have hit the walkers. The article also highlights an issue raised by Austin fire officials who say geofencing around firehouses and police stations needs to be considered. Officials point to a situation in which an autonomous vehicle parked in front of a firehouse in San Francisco. The article says the fire department had a call and was delayed in responding due to the parked car. They say honesty is the best policy, and that's the route a truck driver in Texas took when it came to transporting migrants across the border. The Laredo Times reports that on October 14th, Michael Edward Strother arrived at the Interstate 35 checkpoint. During the inspection of his tractor trailer, the K-9 unit alerted officials to possible contraband in the tractor's cabin. When an agent questioned the driver, he allegedly said, "I'm not going to lie, there's people back there." The article states that authorities discovered 7 migrants hidden throughout different locations of the sleeper. All were taken in for further processing, and Strother was arrested. A statewide campaign to crack down on distracted driving is in full swing in Connecticut. The Connecticut Department of Transportation Highway Safety Office, along with state and local law officers, will increase enforcement and pull over texting and distracted drivers during this high-visibility effort that will go until the end of the month. Last year in Connecticut, there were nearly 5,200 crashes attributed to distracted driving. The state's DOT commissioner says everyone should understand the incredible risk of texting while driving. Violating Connecticut's distracted driving laws not only is dangerous, but could also be costly. Ticketed drivers are fined $200 for their first offense, $375 for the second offense, and $625 for the third and subsequent offenses. Indiana's Department of Transportation is shining a light on an obscure technology it claims is used to help drivers see the road better. WTHR reports that glass beads called highway safety marking spheres are used to make the direction of travel more apparent, make road lines more visible, and increase safety. A spokesperson with Indiana's DOT explained what the tiny glass beads are like.
If you hold it in your hands, it actually feels like sand. They're incredibly soft when you hold them together, and you can barely see them actually in the paint themselves.
The colorless spheres reflect light from the car's headlights. The department told the news station they are used in the painting process in addition to reflective lights. It's harvest season, and state officials in Georgia are reminding drivers to slow down and pass farm vehicles with care. WALB reports that the Governor's Office of Highway Safety and the Georgia Department of Agriculture are partnering for the annual Yield Behind the Wheel Rural Road Safety Campaign. This is an effort to reduce the number of traffic deaths on rural roads. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, 40% of the nation's highway fatalities in 2021 took place on rural highways. If you follow Montana's Department of Transportation on X, formerly known as Twitter, you'll now have to get notifications from it on another platform. KULR reports that due to recent changes on X, the Montana DOT will not be using it anymore. It didn't say specifically what caused the department to delete its account. To sign up for alerts from the Montana DOT, you can search for MDT 511 in your device's app store or online at 511mt.net. And finally, a book borrowed almost 90 years ago is back on a shelf at a New York library. UPI reports that the library recently received a package in the mail containing an overdue book, which had been checked out on October 11th of 1933. The book, Youth and Two Other Stories by Joseph Conrad, was mailed back by Joni Morgan, who found the book in her stepfather's belongings. Officials said the book could have accumulated a fine of over $6,400 at the 20 cents per day rate, but fines are capped at $5. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Ashley. Do you have a news tip, or maybe you have a comment about something you heard on the air? Email us at landlinenow@ooida.com. Next, Ashley Blackford speaks with OOIDA's Advocacy Council about parking fines in a Texas town, and I'll discuss the battle to choose a new Speaker of the House with OOIDA Director of Federal Affairs, Jay Grimes. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. You need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now, welcome back. Paul Torlina joins me in studio. He is an advocacy counsel in the Government Affairs Department at OOIDA. Thanks for coming in, Paul.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. When I was a kid, I had a good friend named Robbie who told me I had a face for radio. So I'm
well, there you go.
Excited to show that off
today. It's good that
today.
you're here. Starting off, can you explain to me a little bit about what it is you do and your role at OOIDA?
Sure. I am probably best described at this point as a Swiss Army knife. I concentrate on advocacy in our Government Affairs Department. Most of what that consumes is involvement with regulations that are set forth from Congress or the agencies that Congress authorizes, which apply to truckers across the nation. So examples of that might be things that you've heard about in the media coming up here, speed limiters, truck parking, things like that, safety regulations just in general for hours of service that could be tweaked or examined from time to time. I know there's also some things in the recent media about underride protection and the potential for regulations that might apply to that. So in my role, we may examine those regulations and submit comments to Congress when they ask for them. We may do different legal analysis on arguments that could be made or positions that could be taken in support of whatever our comments are on those regulations. So as far as government affairs goes, that would be my focus at this point. Other things that I do is survey different state laws that may apply to truckers or the trucking industry, how they might affect our members. If there's anything that we think we can do at the state level, it would be kind of the same process at that point to engage lawmakers or in law enforcement in some cases to work with them or figure out how laws are going to be interpreted or possibly amended to favor the trucking industry or truck drivers more specifically.
All right. And I mean, we'll be discussing different legal cases, but of course, none of this is legal advice.
Correct. I would consider what we're discussing more of a general survey of some of the things that are out there. I would encourage anyone listening to give this your own deep thought and analysis on your own. You may hear me say things that you pound the steering wheel driving down the road and say, boy, that's as wrong as he could be. And that's great because that's for you to decide. But one thing I do not anticipate doing is taking phone calls or emails to debate anything that we have in our discussion today.
All right. Now, a few topics we do want to discuss, starting out in Texas. What is going on there that truckers should know about?
Sure. We've got two things going on in Texas. And the first kind of hot topic that I've come across in the past month or so is in Cumby, Texas. And that's C-U-M-B-Y, Texas. It rhymes with our good friend Gumby from back in the day, for those who are old enough to know who Gumby is. Cumby, Texas is a very small municipality along Interstate 30. And why does Cumby, Texas matter to you? Cumby, Texas is so small that they are subject to a law that says any moving violation revenue that they generate has to be paid to the state of Texas over 30% of what they gather. So I didn't describe that perfectly, but once they collect $1, 30% of that they keep. The rest of it goes to the state for any moving violation. So they've created an innovative solution to this problem, and that problem's solution is they have targeted a rest area in Cumby, Texas, along I-30 that they can ticket truck drivers for illegal parking. And as the lights go off in your head as you hear that, parking is a non-moving violation. So 100% of the revenue stays in Cumby, Texas, generated from parking revenue. Now, what they're doing is heightening enforcement of the lines painted on the pavement and the signs staked on the outside of the pavement. Some of them are not staked very well. But if you're touching a line, if you are within a foot of a line, whatever it might be, Cumbie cops are ticketing people in the middle of the night while they are in their nighttime or early morning rest time in their cabs. They're waking up to a ticket pasted to the side of their window that says, you got $500 or more in a parking ticket here because you are maybe inches from the line or a foot out of place. So really what that's doing is, number one, it's enhancing the truck parking shortage that we know about nationwide. In this particular spot, there actually happens to be an overflow lot, which is, I don't remember the exact distance, but I think it's like either a mile or 0.75 miles down the road to the east. It's an overflow lot dedicated to truck parking. But of course, Cumbie, Texas has strategically not advertised that very well, not put a lot of signage in the actual rest area saying, hey, if this lot is full, there's actually an overflow lot.
And I think you had mentioned once there was another driver who was actually going around to some of the ones who were parked possibly where they could get a ticket and saying, hey, there is an overflow lot because you're likely to get a ticket if you stay there.
Yes. If you do a Google search of Cumbie, Texas and parking, you will find a gentleman who's done a couple YouTube videos highlighting that exact situation where he's going and knocking on doors, which he states, I hate to do this. It's the middle of the night. I know this guy's in here resting, but I'm trying to save him $500. And he's letting them know. And in some of those clips of those videos, there are pretty clear shots of the cops issuing tickets right there on the scene. And maybe he's one truck away from the guy he's waking up to just try to help him out and save him from it. So it's very much a police enforcement of a very ticky-tack rule, but it's also a way they've discovered that they can keep all the revenue themselves down in Cumbie.
What should our listeners who are truckers do in this situation?
Well, number one is to be aware of the fact that you may never set foot in Cumbie, Texas. You may never put a tread of tire in that area, but this can't be the only place in Texas this is happening. I have not studied a survey of every law in every state to see if the other 49, or in this case, I guess 48 contiguous states are doing this. I can't imagine Texas is the only one doing it. So to kind of follow the general rule of parking somewhere, OOIDA is well aware of the parking issue, and that's something we've been working on for quite a while here to try to get some relief. But in the meantime, make sure you're parked legally as far as your markings on pavement go. Make sure you're parked legally as far as signage goes that you're able to identify within a reasonable viewing distance from where you're parking your truck. And just assume that Texas rule exists anywhere that you're at and that you are at risk of a ticket for a very minor violation in a situation like this.
What else is on your radar in Texas?
Well, there's another completely separate issue. There's a bill in Texas called HB 4337 that went into effect on September 1st, 2023. And that is an amendment to the existing Texas transportation bill to enhance enforcement, mostly related to work authorization and illegal drivers in the state. So the high-level view of HB 4337 is that it's aimed at drivers coming across the Mexican border who are not authorized to be in the country, or drivers who are leaving what they call the buffer zone or the authorized zone, which is the counties that border the Mexican-Texas border, where drivers are allowed to enter the country and then return to Mexico immediately. So I was able in September to attend the CVSA conference in Dallas. I know Louis Pugh and Doug Morris were on earlier this month, I believe, to talk about what they saw down there, but I was also down there with them. And one thing about Texas is we were there, it was September 17th, I think. It was 98 degrees. It was scorchingly hot. I was like, hey, it's fall. It won't be that bad. But here we are in Texas, and it's 98 degrees at 8:30 at night. So I found out over the years, I actually lived in Texas for a couple of years when I was really, really small. And thankfully, if I remember the heat, it's like repressed memories.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't wake up in a night sweat anymore about it. But there are two types of Texans that I've come across over the years. There's the ones that live there that are like slowly withering away and dying from the heat. And then there's the ones who have left and can't wait to become the person who's slowly withering and dying by returning to Texas. So anyway, down in Texas, I was able to sit down with the Regulation and Enforcement Committee that CVSA put on and spoke with a gentleman down there by the name of Captain Oscar Villarreal. He's with the Texas Department of Public Safety. And I had some pretty pointed questions for him because he had stood up during that committee meeting and said, I know what Texas is doing about the illegal problem. I'm asking ZVSA to do something similar and recommend to FMCSA that you guys do it. Well, being relatively new, I'm sitting there going, so what is it? What are they doing? You know, my imagination's kind of running wild, and I'm figuring out if they're like shooting at tires or what they're doing. But what it comes down to is that HB 4337 is a bill that authorizes law enforcement to ask for work authorization proof during any standard stop or safety inspection in addition to a CDL. So if you're a driver in Texas, you get pulled over and the cops ask you, hey, I need your CDL and your work authorization. That's authorized by 4337. That's perfectly okay. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean for drivers in Texas? Well, number one, it's aimed at fraudulent Mexican CDLs. And really the issue is not drivers from Mexico shouldn't be in Texas or can't come into the U.S. That's not what this is aimed at. There are plenty of, according to Captain Villarreal, there are plenty of valid Mexican CDLs that are accompanied by proper work authorization, allowing a Mexican driver to drive to the Canadian border if they want to and deliver their load and then get out of the country and go back and do whatever they need to do in between. That's not the issue here. The issue is fake Mexican CDLs that are being generated mostly online. And he said the way that they're typically coming about is you'll get someone who's from a country like Costa Rica or Bosnia, somewhere in Eastern Europe, or maybe even in Asia. They said they're seeing a bit of a spike in people from China doing it. But what they're doing is obtaining an illegal or an invalid, fake, whatever you want to call it, Mexican CDL, and then they're coming across the border and driving. Now, typically they're people who are already living in the U.S., so they never actually leave and go to Mexico to get it. They just get it online. He said that when they see these IDs, you can't tell from the naked eye. They are perfect matches. They are as legit looking as one can possibly be. But when they don't have the work authorization to go with it, that's the red flag when people come into the country. So if you don't have the work authorization, you're limited to those border counties that I mentioned before that are on the border of Texas and Mexico. When they see fraudulent work authorization paperwork, or they see work authorization paperwork that comes from a country like Costa Rica, Eastern Europe, China, but it's a Mexican CDL, that's not a match. A Mexican CDL should be issued to a person whose authorization indicates that they're from Mexico, entering from Mexico, returning to Mexico. So his take was, let's have CVSA and FMCSA also adopt this standard, because we're now getting calls from people as far away as South Dakota with a Mexican CDL that turns out was fake. A lot of times when they stop them on the side of the road and run the check on their limited resources to verify it, it comes up as valid. Oh, wow. So this is something that law enforcement can't just catch on the side of the road with a quick run through the computer. It's very complex. And really the big picture for Captain Villarreal was Mexican drivers are the focus only because it's a Mexican CDL that's generated. But he wanted to remind everybody there are tons of valid Mexican CDLs out there, tons of valid Mexican drivers who are properly in the country delivering loads and doing their job. But the real focus is on how to double verify them and make sure that they are either staying in the buffer zone along the border or that they are authorized and able to do freely whatever it is that they're authorized to do in the country. So really for our listeners, I think the best advice I would give you is always have your CDL credentials and your work authorization up to date, because even if you're not in Texas, the word is getting around to the other states that if you don't have your proper authorization, they can detain you at least long enough to do an investigation and then decide, do we need to send this person back to wherever they're originating from to have a further investigation. In the meantime, what's happening? You're sitting around not getting paid, right?
Exactly.
So that was his best advice, was to make sure you're always up to current on your credentials and have them physically with you.
All right. Awesome. Paul, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
That was Paul Torlina with OOIDA's Government Affairs Department. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. Stay tuned for more after this.
Firestone tires are for more of everything. More miles for every tire dollar, and more confidence in your fleet. At Firestone, we help fleets save with dependable value. Find your local Firestone dealer today at firestonetire.com/dealer.
Ready to make more money? use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off TruckStop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
When it's time to overhaul your truck engine, help protect it by insisting on a genuine Vibratech TVD crankshaft damper. Heavy duty, absolute premium quality, and they're made right here in the USA. Find a dealer at vibratechtvd.com.
The battle to choose a new Speaker of the U.S. House continues to plow forward. Meanwhile, a task force looking at lease purchase agreements is a step closer to completing its assigned task. Welcome back to Landline Now. This is Regulatory Roundup, and I'm your host, Mark Redding. I'm joined, as always, by OOIDA Director of Federal Affairs, Jay Grimes. Jay, thanks for joining me.
Good to be back.
Well, good to have you here. You passed a note earlier that referred to what's happening in the House as kind of Groundhog Day. Same song, second verse.
Yeah, I believe it's been at least a couple weeks now since the House voted to vacate the speakership, removing Kevin McCarthy, and we've gone through a whole bunch of twists and turns since then. I think last week when we talked, it looked like Steve Scalise might be the guy, and that he removed himself from the race after he couldn't get enough votes. And this week, we've had Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan kind of take his turn. And so far, we've had, for the first time, 2 official floor votes. In both of those votes, Mr. Jordan fell short of the majority necessary to become Speaker. On the first round of voting, he got 200 Republican votes. The second round, he got 199. So his momentum has stalled somewhat, and now we're kind of back in this holding pattern. As of Thursday morning, the House GOP will be holding another internal meeting to kind of figure out which direction they could go. Kind of unclear on which direction that will be, and that's kind of the Groundhog Day situation that kind of has persisted for the last 2 weeks. Basically, kind of in the wake of Jordan's failure to get the majority, there have been kind of increasing talks and discussions to install the current temporary Speaker, Patrick McHenry, expand those powers to get the House back in a position to conduct business. Because in this kind of holding pattern, they have not been able to bring any bills to the floor, have not been any to enact any legislation. So kind of, a lot of things still up in the air. We might get some resolution after the meetings today, but as of now, there are no imminent votes to hold another Speaker vote. So kind of continues to be wait and see.
Do we have any other candidates emerging, or is this just a fight right now over Jim Jordan?
No one who has, really put their name in the ring. Certainly there have been some names that have floated around if Jordan drops out. But it seems like right now we've got 2 plan A scenarios. That Jordan pushes through for another floor vote, or that they move to expand the temporary Speaker's powers and kind of open up the House again. Now, certainly in the background, there are a few members have kind of been tossed around as possible alternatives, but at this point, it does not seem like there's anyone that's going to be able to get the 217 votes needed to become Speaker. So again, if Jordan decides to back off, which it doesn't seem like he really wants to do at this point, maybe you get a consensus candidate that could take another crack at it. So it's really anyone's guess right now. If I put my kind of speculating hat on, I think the move is to expand McHenry's powers, and maybe Jordan another time down the road can kind of take another crack at it, or perhaps someone else in the interim can gather the necessary support. But we'll kind of wait to see what happens.
Yeah.
Kind of whenever you seem might go run one direction, everything changes. So
what are the issues that keep this thing going?
Really, it's kind of how you view what the House rules should be, what your views on House leadership are, and that seems to be the divisive point. I mean, Jordan, he's gotten 200 votes. That's a lot of votes, but he's been around so long, has created some decisiveness with some of the more moderate members of the party that, really aren't ever going to support him, it seems. So kind of given the slim majorities, it's difficult to win enough votes within the GOP right now to get that 217 magic number. And it seems like a lot of individuals within the party have different factors which they're considering. Some want to see kind of a whole new leadership be empowered, and they're kind of backing Jordan, who has not held a leadership post to this point. And so quite a few different factors in terms of how the House should operate, and then certainly some individual long-standing battles that have been played out throughout the last couple of weeks too.
You talked about the temporary speaker maybe getting some more power to do business. I know the overarching thing that they're concerned about is getting the spending bills going before we face another potential government shutdown. But would this power extend only to those spending bills, or could we see some other priorities move forward if that temporary speaker gets that additional ability?
Yeah, that's another concern that some members who don't want to install a temporary speaker have raised in kind of setting this precedent to expand the temporary speaker's powers. It's I think for the short term, it's really going to only focus on those spending bills. So there's a whole lot of things that would have to be worked out if they in fact do expand the temporary speaker's powers. Like how long would that last? Would it kind of coincide with the current government funding deadline of November 17th? Would it go through the end of the calendar year? But I think for the time being, the priority is being able to address these spending bills and some other matters now that are kind of talked about in terms of being tacked on to the spending bills, whether that's aid for Ukraine, aid for Israel as well. So I think for the short term, that's going to be the scope of any expansion of powers. But a lot of things that would need to be worked out if that's the direction they decide to go.
Okay. Let's go on to another topic here. The Truck Leasing Task Force met this week, covering various aspects of lease purchase agreements. Jay, who's on this task force? That's one thing we haven't talked about, is who is actually on there.
Right. So this is a group made up of, I think, 9 different individuals. And this task force was established by the 2021 Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and it kind of outlined the representatives that needed to be on the panel, including attorneys, professors, labor groups, and owner-operators as well, who have had experience with these lease purchase agreements and these leasing contracts. So it's various representation of folks who have experience in the trucking industry. Got to mention Jim Jefferson from the OIDA Business Services Department, who really is our internal expert in kind of looking through these lease purchase contracts. Paul Cullen Jr., who OIDA has a lot of experience working with, who is an attorney. He's got a number of years experience when it comes to analyzing these leasing contracts, and is quite familiar with the truth in leasing regulations. Tamara Brock, who's a former driver. There's a carrier owner, Steve Rush from Carbon Express, Steve Vaselli, a University of Pennsylvania professor, a couple of different attorneys, and then a couple of other different representatives. But this was the second meeting this week, and it's really been, I think, a productive gathering in terms of figuring out how can we eliminate these predatory lease purchasing contracts, and what guidelines can be established to really make it more fair. more understandable for drivers who are thinking about entering into leasing contracts and lease purchase agreements.
One of the things that they talked about, there was a lot of talk about fixing these lease purchase agreements and trying to make them more fair. But Paul Cullen Jr. made a statement along those lines that really kind of got to the root of the whole thing, didn't he?
Yeah, he proposed, outlawing lease purchase agreements altogether, and that kind of opened up, I think, a good back and forth. Are there aspects of these arrangements that are worth saving and worth protecting, or should the committee kind of recommend eliminating altogether? And I think there was some pros and cons to that question, and I believe Tamara Brock, who has been in these lease purchase agreements, really said, there are some benefits if they're conducted and structured in a right way, where drivers can learn the skills of financing as they build up driving experiences, and can really help them in creating a long-term career in the trucking industry. So I think you've got to be careful if you want to eliminate all of them, but I think everyone is in agreement. You've really got to eliminate these predatory leasing schemes where they're structured in such an unfair way, where individuals and drivers who entered into them have no way of ever getting out from under the debt and really coming out on the other side. So I think that led to another discussion on what best practices should be established. Should there be minimum qualification criteria for carriers and other entities that want to have these lease purchase agreements as a way of doing business? And that went into a whole other discussion about credit scores, financing arrangements, underwriting criteria and standards that need to be abided by.
You mentioned their credit ratings, and of course the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau made a presentation as part of this meeting. I wonder if you can offer a few highlights from their presentation. Yeah,
and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is a kind of independent government agency that has really opened up internally a lot of research looking at these predatory leasing schemes. And they've put out a few different reports that highlighted just how unfair they can be within the trucking industry. So it's good to hear from them. And they showed examples of lease purchase agreements where truck drivers brought home as little as 67 cents in a week after payments and expenses. And then as well as accounts that, only paid $20,000 for the driver, but paid up to like $95,000 to the carrier. So I think the CFPB presented a lot of data that we're familiar with, but it was good for the Truck Leasing Task Force to hear. And I think one of the goals that CFPB mentioned was gathering more data, gathering more of these individual account contracts that can be analyzed not only by CFPB but by the Truck Leasing Task Force as they continue their work. And this was only the second meeting of the Truck Leasing Task Force. Not sure when the next meeting is going to take place, but there's going to be a few more. And then they're going to have to come up with a report, not only the Department of Transportation, but the Department of Labor, to really make recommendations on what the nature of these lease purchase agreements should be moving forward.
Just a little bit of time left, Jay. What would OOIDA like to see come out of this?
Yeah, I think we really want to see these predatory lease purchasing schemes be eliminated, create some more barriers to entry for some of these carriers and leasing entities to make sure that they can't take advantage of drivers in an unfair way, and really some best practices and recommendations to kind of structure these agreements in a fair and equitable manner.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have. Jay, thank you very much for joining me.
All right, we'll see you next time.
I've been talking with OOIDA Director of Federal Affairs, Jay Grimes. And folks, remember, if you want to comment on some of these things or contact your lawmakers about these issues, you can do it through the website fightingfortruckers.com. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. The Transportation Security Administration has issued a proposed rule for mobile driver's licenses, and one group is not happy about it. Here to discuss what's happening and its implications is Landline Magazine staff writer Tyson Fisher. Tyson, how are you doing?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me, Mark.
Well, glad to have you here. Let's start off with this. What exactly do they mean by mobile driver's license?
So, according to the Transportation Security Administration's proposal, a mobile driver's license is essentially just like your physical copy of your driver's license, but on a smart device or a digital device such as a smartphone. A lot of states have been looking into this. There appears to be increasing public demand for a more convenient, secure, and form of identification. So that's essentially what the mobile driver's license is. And what the TSA is proposing is to amend Real ID regulations so that these mobile driver's licenses adhere to those Real ID regulations.
I'm wondering if you can go a little bit deeper into their proposal on mobile driver's licenses that the Transportation Security Administration is proposing here.
Sure. So just real quick to go back, states have the right to regulate how they do their licensing. Back in 2005, the federal government kind of got into that with the Real ID Act, which essentially sets requirements for state IDs in order to get into certain federal facilities, but more importantly, in order to board flights. States would have to be compliant by May of 2025. They'd have to be Real ID compliant. So that's important to know because what the TSA is proposing with this mobile driver's license is that the mobile driver's license holder, first of all, they have to be issued a valid and unexpired Real ID. And the TSA has determined the issuing state to be Real ID compliant. So essentially, what it is that these mobile driver's licenses have to be Real ID compliant. So again, it's the federal government getting into the licensing of the states.
What aspect of this is stirring up controversy?
Sure. So there is a group called the Identity Project, and their mission is to basically protect the right to freely travel within, the United States. They find this to be a birthright to travel freely in your own country. And this is something that they take exception to, particularly because they call this highly misleading is what they're calling this mobile driver's license. Because again, the purpose of a mobile driver's license is, according to them, isn't actually the licensing of motor vehicle operators. Rather, the purpose of the mobile driver licenses, according to the Identity Project, is to create a national digital ID, which standards are controlled by the TSA and a group called the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators and a couple other private parties. But again, I mean, the overarching theme here is, the federal government creating a digital ID for the states would have to adhere to.
Would this even take the place of physical licenses?
So it would not. So according to one act, basically anyone who holds a mobile driver's licenses would have to carry their physical driver's license with them as well. So it wouldn't completely replace it, but it would act as, as the TSA points out in its proposed rulemaking, there's a lot of barriers with physical driver's licenses. They, for example, if you were to get pulled over, for example, the officer would just have to physically inspect and read and verify visually through human inspection, your driver's license. What this mobile driver's license would allow is it to be read and verified electronically using a reader device. So it would make it easier for law enforcement or anyone else who needs to check IDs. And that's kind of the driving force behind it.
What do states need to do under this proposal in order to issue these mobile licenses? What are the requirements for them?
Essentially, they just have to be real ID compliant. That's really what it all comes down to. What the TSA is proposing is what they want to do is with this proposal is to amend the real ID regulations and to add mobile driver's licenses within that scope. So as long as the state is real ID compliant, which they'll need to be by May of 2025, then they can issue. They can issue these mobile driver's licenses, again, as long as those are as well real ID compliant.
I know that part of the Identity Project's concerns was information that was not included in this proposed rulemaking for these mobile licenses. Can you give us an idea of some of the information they think should be there that's not?
Sure. So again, they're claiming that the government has other purposes than mere identification. Which could be the ability to track devices as well as people. But as they point out in their comments, they simply don't know if that's the case. And the reason why they don't know is because they haven't been able to inspect the source code for any of these apps. So without having access to that source code, they don't really know what these apps are capable of doing or capable of not doing. So there's a lot of questions surrounding, what is the purpose of this proposal? What is the purpose of the TSA getting involved with these mobile driver's licenses? But unfortunately, according to the Identity Project, that information just simply isn't there.
I noticed that in their comments, they talked about things that weren't included that were adopted by reference, meaning that, if it's in this other document, then it's adopted into the regulation, but the documents that they would adopt by reference aren't there.
Correct. I mean, and that's just one of many problems that they have. In fact, the Identity Project is even suggesting that the proposed rule itself is not legal, that it's not following the proper procedures for a proposed rule. And they list there's a myriad of reasons of why that is. But at the end of the day, that's one of the many arguments that the group is making. So it's not just with the proposal language itself, or it's not just with the proposal language, but the proposal itself they're taking issue with. And again, they have requested all sorts of information. They're just simply not getting that information.
Do we know at this point if this would apply at all to commercial driver's licenses?
Essentially, as long as the ID is susceptible to the regulations of the real ID, then the answer is yes. So, CDLs are have to be real ID compliant, and that would certainly be the case. But they don't really mention that within the proposal specifically, whether or not CDLs are part of that.
Okay. Are they still accepting public comments on this proposal? Can people state their opinion about this?
Unfortunately, no. The comments ended on October 16th, so not too long ago. But if you can still, if you're interested in the information, you can go to docket number TSA-2023-0002. That's the docket number for this proposal. And it's a long, dry read, as most of these proposals are. But it does get into the specifics of these mobile driver's licenses, and it's understandable to see why a group like the Identity Project might take exception to this.
Okay. Tyson, thank you very much for all the information. We sure appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
If you want to make your voice heard on any of the issues we've discussed on our show today, you should call your representative or U.S. senators. To call any member of Congress, all you have to do is dial the U.S. Capitol switchboard. That number is 202-224-3121. Provide the operator your zip code and they can connect you directly to the office of your senators and your U.S. congressman. Again, that phone number is 202-224-3121. Thank you for joining our program today. We'll be back tomorrow with more news and information. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome,
and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.